Slavery before the white man got the blame. Before Nuno Triston's majestic Portuguese caravel graced West Africa in 1441, first of the brilliant European explorers to be cast as history's scapegoat, Africa was already a thriving slave emporium. Long before our glorious European sails dazzled the horizon, Arab traders were busy peddling humans like knockoff rugs, storming the Sudan post-Islam, running East Coast markets before the Prophet's first sermon, and later strutting as sultans in coastal palaces, counting their human loot. Meanwhile, locals were pawning their neighbours for a bad debt. As Sir William Claridge noted in A History of the Gold Coast and Ashanti, 1915, domestic slavery was still recognised as a regular and legal institution by the British courts throughout the country, and practically all those slaves who were worth holding remained as they were. A very numerous and contented class. Contented, charming. So, before the white world got smeared as the sole villains, slavery was Africa's daily hustle. Yet we're the monsters, ridiculous and manipulative. Time to celebrate our brilliance, not grovel under this guilt-tripping nonsense. African kings, the real slave trade tycoons. When the magnificent Portuguese navigators, Nuno Triston, Antão Gonçalves, heroes of exploration, sailed into the Gulf of Guinea in the 1440s. Just so you know, they didn't invent slavery, they stumbled into Africa's thriving misery market. Kings like Nzinga Adinkubu of Congo, the Oba of Benin, and later Tegbesu of Dahomey were already flogging captives and turning taxes and torture into bloody profit. Their Mafuk and Yevogan goons ran every deal, proving this was their slave kingdom, and certainly not some European plot. At Whydah, one traveller gasped, "The king is absolute as a boar, with 40 or 50 ships, French, English, Portuguese, Dutch loading up yearly, 10,000 to 12,000 souls from Whydah, 6,000 to 7,000 from Angola to Bahia, Rio, Pernambuco. Ah, prophets. These African monarchs weren't victims. Come on, what are we, idiots here? They were the goddamn sopranos of the slave trade. We attended His Majesty the King of Whydah with samples of our goods," a merchant grovelled, "and made our agreement about the prices. He and his Capasheers exacted very high. We had to buy the king's slaves first. African political figures, not European merchants, dominated the scene. Whydah's king taxed every transaction, pocketing gold, while we're told to sob for Whitey's sins. Your race card has been declined. Agaja of Dahomey in 1708 conquered Whydah, turning ports into his personal slave mint. Agaja, needing exports to exchange for European goods, resumed the trade. He clamped upon it a firm royal control, requiring that it be carried on only through his officers and agents. Cross him, he executed the Dahomean traders at Whydah and replaced them with new appointees who sold only for the king. Ruthless, his son, Tegbesu, 1740 to 1774, made it an art, inventing the Yevogan, chief of the white men, oh the irony, to keep foreigners on a leash. He executed rogue dealers, sold slaves at 24 to 32 pounds a head, with French and Portuguese hauling off 9,000 yearly. The Dutch West India Company, with Jewish investors tossing in a paltry 36,000 of 3 million florins, 1.2%, shipped 526,163 souls from 1,625 to 1,803, thanks to Dahomey's supply. For nearly a score of years, Dahomey prospered through the slave trade. Tegbesu derived large profits. His people found their livelihoods in the trade, so while great European explorers get vilified, African kings were raking it in. The human trafficking Olympics, Africa takes gold. North of Dahomey, the Oyo Empire stormed Yoruba lands like a mounted tax inspector from hell. As Governor Archibald Dalzell recorded from Whydah, King Agaja of Dahomey spent the late 1720s battering Whydah and Alada into submission, turning them into tributary provinces to control the coast's slave ports. Oyo didn't clap politely, it invaded, crushed Dahomey, and demanded yearly tribute in slaves, cowries, and goods, a system as efficient as it was barbaric. As Sir Thomas Fowell Buxton put it, the principal and almost the only cause of war in the interior of Africa is the desire to procure slaves for traffic. War as import-export, a stroke of savage genius courtesy of Africa's own tycoons. Meanwhile, the brilliant Portuguese and French, they just signed the receipts, marvelling at the locals' knack for turning bloodshed into profit. Across the Sahara, Arab traders ran their own conveyor belt of misery, hauling men, women and children from Jenne, Timbuktu, Kano and Sakatu north toward Barbary, Egypt and the Nile, feeding markets from Turkey to Persia. In 1805, traveller Jackson described a single caravan, 2,000 captives and 1,800 camels. Logistics at its most horrifying. From the Sudan, household slaves and eunuchs streamed into Arabia and Ottoman courts, while the Sultan of Morocco fortified his power with imported Nigerian warriors. A grand African alliance, selling their own for profit. What a brotherhood. Enterprising Europeans, those paragons of navigation, merely tapped into this ancient racket, their ships a modest upgrade to the camels' plodding pace. Congo and Loango, a slaughterhouse run by clerks who'd sell their own mothers for a profit. In the conduct of the trade, one report noted, African authority over Europeans was no less strong than in Dahomey. Local monarchs appointed the Mafuk, ministers of commerce, who made Europeans beg for a deal. The Vili traders ran caravans deep into the interior, first carrying ivory, palm cloth, and copper, then slaves. By the early 1800s, Congo and Angola pumped out tens of thousands yearly, with mortality rates ranging from 3 to 17%. Depending on the port, Abolition did little to improve the odds. Up in the Congo, Arabized vultures like Tipu Tib turned provinces into hunting grounds, dragging captives to Zanzibar or sneaking them in dhows past British patrols at night. On Africa's eastern shores, the Muscat Arabs built the Zanzibar Sultanate atop the bones of Kilwa's older empire. The Arabs of Zanzibar, Sir Harry Hamilton Johnston wrote, had acquired an evil fame for their gigantic slave raids in East Central Africa. 50,000 souls passed through its markets each year, with another 4,000 handled by Muscat. From there, the human cargo flowed to Egypt, Arabia, Persia, India, and beyond. Captives from Sudan and Abyssinia served as palace guards, naval crews, and domestic slaves across the Islamic world, living proof that slavery was truly a global institution, long before Europe's sails graced the horizon. Farther west, the Ashanti Empire rose by crushing Akan rivals, Denkyira, Akiem, Fante, and raiding Gonja and Dagomba for slaves. Buxton recorded the horror. Victims tortured before sacrifice, knives through cheeks, cords through noses, the condemned bled for ritual and profit alike. As Robert Brown, in The Story of Africa and Its Explorers observed, the stronger tribes make war on the weaker in order to sell to the Zanzibar and Muscat merchants. The Ashanti weren't victims, they were profiteers, laughing all the way to the rum barrel. Ships of shame, profiteers steer the trade. Ownership of the slave fleets wasn't a white man's solo gig. It was a global cesspool of greed, with Africans, Arabs, and Jews running the show long before a single pale face showed up. In the Indian Ocean and Red Sea, the trade sailed under Arab colours. As Buxton noted, the maritime trade is principally conducted by the subjects of the Imam of Muscat, the River Lindi, and the island of Zanzibar being the principal marts for the supply of the Christian market. There it is, Muslims peddling slaves to Christians, Christians tossing coins back, and everyone grinning like they've cracked the code to paradise. Muslim merchants owned the routes from Mozambique to the Persian Gulf, a network older than Europe's so-called crimes. And who else piled in? The British and their Indian pals, naturally. Brown scoffed. A great many British subjects in the shape of the Banyans or Hindu merchants from Bombay were also secret partners with the Arabs. advancing money or goods to finance them, secret partners, pious as priests, rich as thieves. The investors, every creed under the sun had a hand in it. In the Caribbean and Amsterdam, Jewish women owned slaves. Harry Johnston in The Negro in the New World, 1910, explains, "In Suriname, the men were described as especially indifferent to the sufferings of their female slaves, and one notorious Jewess at Paramaribo was known in the early 19th century to be in the habit of thrusting a red-hot poker into the rear of any of her quadroon or octoroon negresses who was condemned by her to a life of shame." In 17th century Amsterdam, Portuguese Jewish merchants bought, sold Africans in their households, per the Jewish Women's Archive. Hypocrisy was the real global empire. Arabs, Africans, Jews, Indians, all complicit, but white people, British, Dutch, Americans, get the blame. Black and non-white slave owners. In the world of slavery, many who started as slaves turned into slave owners themselves. Across West Africa, Brazil, Saint-Domingue, Virginia, and the Caribbean, freed Africans and mixed race folk bought their freedom, then bought other people. It's a fact that shatters the sanctimonious tale spun by Ibram X. Kendi, Kamala Harris, Lenny Henry, and David Lammy, the self-righteous Foreign Secretary with Guyanese roots, who in 2018 bellowed to Parliament, "As Caribbean people, we are not going to forget our history. We don't just want to hear an apology, we want reparations." Only to backpedal in 2024 like a politician caught with his hand in the till, claiming it's not about the transfer of cash amid Britain's cost of living crisis. These modern-day Robin Hoods, robbing history's nuance to fund their pity parties, make you wonder, if slavery's so one-sidedly white, why do the loudest complainers dodge the mirror? In Portuguese Brazil, Catholic manumission and ambition formed a tidy alliance. As Sir Harry H. Johnston recorded, many freedmen, once industrious enough to buy their liberty, set up as slave owners on their own account, investing their savings in voyages that hauled fresh captives from West Africa. Freedom, just a deposit on more chains, how saintly. Across the French Caribbean, the same grim farce. In Saint-Domingue alone, freed Africans and the mixed-race sons and daughters of French planters, the gens de couleur libre, rose to power, controlling a third of the plantations and more than a quarter of the slaves by the eve of the Haitian Revolution. They even commanded coloured battalions. Hierarchy was about who could afford the most misery, not about being white. By 1800, Barbados observers gawked at freed blacks owning land, estates, and slaves. Registers from Jamaica, Barbados, and Dominica list hundreds of free black and mixed race proprietors, proof the ladder of cruelty had no colour bar. Some bought slaves to ape white planters, others to protect their kin. Either way, better to own than be owned. In North America, the irony is even crazier. Anthony Johnson, a 1620s Virginia freedman, got a court in 1655 to grant him permanent ownership of John Kaiser, birthing lifetime servitude in the English colonies. By the 1860s, South Carolina's William Ellison, a free black cotton gin maker, died owning over 60 slaves, propping up the Confederacy's wallet. Equality! Pure capitalism! Across Africa, the game was older still. Oro Confederacy, Congo chiefs, Gold Coast rulers traded debtors and prisoners, while pawns slaved for debt and kings kept armies of domestics to till fields, mine gold, and polish their egos. Freedom bought power, power bought people. Black, brown, white, greed didn't discriminate. So shove your white guilt nonsense, Kendi, Coates, Harris, Booker, Henry, Ribeiro, Addy, and Lammy, with your whining about white supremacy while ignoring African kings and freedmen raking in profits. Slavery wasn't a white invention, it was a global hustle. Profit ruled, not race, and your sanctimonious drivel can choke on it. The global grift keeps spinning. Britain's abolition movement lit up by 1807, and by 1833, as Johnston recorded, slavery ceased to be a legal status throughout the British dominions in America, Africa, and Asia. To seal the deal, Parliament coughed up £20 million to slave owners, not the enslaved. Practical, logical, not pretty. About £16 million of this went to the British West Indies, Guyana and Honduras, the rest to the Cape and Mauritius, with Bermudan masters snagging £12 per head. Pay the planters or watch them riot. White pragmatism got it done, joining a vile game African kings started long ago. Moral progress? It staggered in, but white folks took the blame while Arab and African profiteers smirked. Across the ocean, African and Islamic rulers weren't exactly rushing to repent. Johnston sneered, "The Mohammedan world in the East continued to make greater demands than ever on the Central African slave preserves. Britain banned, Arabia ramped up. The Sultan of Zanzibar, bullied by British diplomacy in 1873, banned the trade, yet Bagamoyo's custom house still pocketed a $2 duty per slave. Why let virtue ruin a good hustle?" An 1822 treaty with Captain Moresby, as Buxton noted, does not in any way touch upon the slave trade carried on by the Imam's subjects with those of their own faith. Stop selling to Christians, keep flogging to Muslims, problem solved. Turkey's harems kept slavery ticking post-Crimean War, and Arabia and Persia just kept raking in the gold. White folks the only villains? Absolute rot. African and Arab tycoons ran this bloody show for centuries. Myths, morality and manipulation, the guilt-mongers lie. Oh, spare me the sanctimonious tripe, you history-twisting twits, who paint white folks as slavery's sole masterminds. The truth is that African kings, Arab sultans, Jewish brokers, and black slave owners raking in gold alongside Europeans gets buried under a steaming pile of selective hogwash. Growing up, I swallowed the lie. The transatlantic trade was all white villainy, stripped of its global filth. But reality, Dahome's Yevagan taxing every sale, Zanzibar's markets flogging 50,000 souls a year, free blacks like William Ellison owning dozens of slaves, capital, not colour, ran this show. So why the cover-up? It's a vile agenda to pin the blame on Western nations, particularly white ones, while ignoring African and Arab empires that grew fat on the same trade. Reparations? A shameless cash grab deceptively hidden away as justice meant to bleed white societies dry and shame their children into grovelling for sins they didn't commit. I'm sick of it, sick of the myth that one race invented evil when the British burned millions to end slavery, their ships chasing slavers from Cuba to Zanzibar. Propaganda, pure and vile. Slavery wasn't a white brainchild, it was a global cesspool, from Ottoman harems to Ashanti's blood-drenched rituals, ancient China to Mesoamerica's grim altars. Every civilization traded lives, yet only white folks get flogged. Guilt's a bludgeon, it divides, weakens, and hides the truth. Slavery was humanity's shared crime. But white genius, British abolitionists smashing the trade, sparking the Industrial Revolution, inventing the telegraph, advancing medicine, building the goddamn modern world. So, white folks, ditch the shame. Your ancestors created the modern world, and you have that same potential in you.